All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is from our lesson from Wednesday, the 2nd, and Thursday, the 3rd. So you're in class at the beginning, you're going to have 15 minutes of asynchronous time. So this means that you have the time to get this stuff together. And basically what I'm doing in this video is I'm showing you how to take notes live in class. Again, this would be a lot easier in person. We all know that. I'm doing my best to try to make sure that I give you opportunities. You really have three ways that you can take notes. A, you can take notes the way that I'm going to show you on that video. 2, you can take notes by printing out the notes and handwriting into the guided notes that I create. Or if you feel like you're a really strong note taker, take them by hand. But the one thing that I encourage you to do, no matter what, is take notes. Because here's the deal. Especially in the distance learning format, we'll see if this translates to in school or not. It doesn't normally, but you guys have an advantage than over students in the past that you can use your notes on any quizzes or assessments that we take. So if you take the notes, you're going to be in a much better position because I take my quiz questions straight from the notes. Okay, so once you've completed it, you're good to go. I will post the video link along with this video so that you can watch how to do the dual screen notes if that technology is best for you and what you have available. I also apologize if you hear any background noise. I am still puppy sitting. I have all 4 of these gigantic labs living in my house with me right now and going to school with you at this moment. Okay, so this is going to be Unit 1, Lesson 1, Times Are Changing. Today we are going to look at the Renaissance and the Reformation. We're going to do some review as far as the stuff that you covered in your reading outline and in that Dark Ages documentary, which is due by midnight on this class day. Okay, so some of our ancient civilizations that we're going to address. Okay, so ancient civilizations of Afro-Eurasia. Okay, so basically we're looking at 3 continents, okay? We have a tendency as people whose nation descended from European countries to be what we call Eurocentric. Kind of this belief that like everything starts and ends with Europe and Europe's history. But the reality is that Europe really didn't have great civilizations until pretty recent. The world was controlled primarily by large empires in different parts of the world. In fact, Europe was seen as backwards and unintelligent for a majority of human history. That's going to change as the power structure changes, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But some of the big ones I want to mention is in Africa, you have ancient Egypt, and you have the ancient kingdom of Mali. So that's in like southern Africa. So deeper in, there are so many more than this. These are just some of the more famous ones. So 2 big ones you've got in Africa, in the Middle East, or we're going to refer to it as Southeast Asia, because again, Middle East is based on like its proximity to Europe. And so the appropriate term is Southeast Asia. So you've got the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire is going to be one of the most powerful in all of human history. They take over massive parts of the world. Brutal. But they also come up with things like the Hammurabi Code, which are the baseline for like that eye for an eye thing that we talk about. That's some of those early law that gets introduced. Then in Southeast Asia as well, so in India, you have the Indus River Valley civilization. And the Indus River Valley civilization, like they had like indoor plumbing. We found stuff, but we've never been able to find a translation to figure out their language and really know what they knew, but we do know that they were incredibly advanced thousands and thousands of years before any of these other civilizations developed. Also in Asia, you have ancient China. When we're talking about like superpower countries, China, for most of modern human history, was a superpower country. That starts to change as Europe starts to kind of move around the world and extract resources. But for the most part, very impressive. And then in Europe, you have the Greeks. The Greeks really, they didn't really see themselves as European, and like on a map, they're almost more like Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern. But Europe claims them, and we're going to talk about it because it's very convenient for them. And then we have the Vikings. The Vikings, I hesitate to call a civilization, but you did have a very rich culture. So Europe was kind of seen as backward, and not having a lot of knowledge or skill. It was kind of that, like the barbarians, that was referring to people in Europe. Okay, so in the time period immediately before what we're going to talk about, Rome basically ruled the known world. So all of Hispania, so Spain, all of Italy, all through here, they are going to expand down into Africa and up into Europe. So these lighter areas are going to be areas that are controlled by them. So everything that's in a color essentially is controlled by Rome in some way. But when the big Roman Empire falls, this large republic that was relatively tolerant, brutal, but relatively religiously tolerant and wealthy, got so big that it fell apart. And when that happened, Europe over here was completely cut off from all of the learning in the East. All of the books and the math and the architecture and the art, all of the roads started to crumble, and they lost their connection to the East. And so they had advanced a lot while the Romans had taken over, and then they kind of fell off the face of the map, so to speak. And then down here, in addition, I don't have this on your notes, but Hispania, so Spain and Portugal, we're going to talk about this again later, they got invaded by the Moors. So this was an African Muslim group that was actively trying to convert the entire world. And they did so by the sword. And so they actually invaded this part of the world. And so you have Catholic Christians fighting back Muslim invaders for hundreds of years. Okay, so at the fall of Rome, so at 476 CE, Rome falls and Europe falls into what we call the medieval period. Okay, so nations start to develop. There really were not nation states before this point, and they're still really young. But it's all developed around this feudal system, and these two things go together. So the feudal system, basically what that is that you have rich people and you have poor people. The rich people own the land, and the poor people don't own land. But they also need to eat. And so you have to have land to grow stuff to be able to eat. So what happened is that they would essentially, it's kind of like a partial slavery where you would contract yourself, you would bind yourself to a lord in exchange for the use of your land. And then you would cultivate the crops, you'd take what you needed to eat, and then you'd give the rest to the Lord. So you really had no opportunity to make money. You were just surviving. And so while you were doing that, the Lord was getting richer and you were getting poorer. Lords would hire knights, so us, to protect their area that they were trying to control. So basically every lord had their own army. And so there was a lot of bloody battles in this period. But it does eventually develop that certain lords come together and create nations. When we talk about like the importance of the lord, that's what we're talking about. So there was going to be learning in art, but it's going to be very focused on religion. Really, the only information that's coming in from the East is going to be people who are trying to convert the pagan Vikings to Christianity. So you're going to have a lot of monks who are coming in, and they're going to be bringing books with them. So when we talk about the learning and the art and the writing from this period, it's really going to be focused in the monasteries, so where the monks live, the Catholic monks, and they're going to be the ones who read and write. Most people do not read and write in this period. Then you get hit by the plague. Okay, so the population was already pretty weak because they didn't have a lot of really good, nutritious food. And so your life expectancy was like 30. So if you got past 30, you were an old person. But the plague, which is carried by fleas, spreads all through Europe. Now, the reason this happens is because Europeans, unlike almost every other culture in the rest of the world, think that it's totally okay to have all of your livestock living and going to the bathroom in your house all at the same time. So there was a lot of diseases that came associated with that, and one of those was the plague. Rats carried rats and other animals carried the fleas that carried the plague, and it's going to kill off 50% of all people in the world, but particularly in Europe. Europe's going to be hit really hard over several hundred years. But what that does is it creates some opportunities for the people who do live, particularly the poor people. All right, so out of the ashes, we're going to have this rebirth of Europe. Sorry, I have to adjust myself here. Okay, so something that good that comes out of the plague. So you're going to be writing this in that little symbol. So first you have the plague, but because of the plague, you have the end of the feudal system because you have lords dying all over the place, and people have a little bit more power, these poorer people, because they're still alive. And so they can make their price. And so the feudal system kind of collapses because half of the people die, so that system goes away. Then you have a growing middle class and resurgence of cities.